Hello, everyone, and welcome to, I believe, the 5th episode of the Moore Report. My name's Colton Moore, serving the Northwest and the Georgia State Senate, and I'm eager to give you an update on what's been going on here in the legislative session. We're about halfway through, and it is red hot, fast-paced, unlike any other session I've ever been through. Typically, we'll go into session for 3 or 4 days, and then we'll have a couple days for committee hearings, but that's not the case in this session. We're going to committee, we're going into session, everything is back-to-back. So if you want to get anything done in this legislative session, you got to be fast on the draw, and if you want to kill anything, you got to be fast on the draw. So I want to give you a quick update of some of the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to legislation that we voted on in the last week or so. Some of the good bills, Senate Bill 84 by Senator Chuck Hufstetler, my neighbor in Floyd County. We share Floyd County together. Concerns elderly abuse. So a problem that banks are having is elders 65 and older who may have dementia or, may be taken advantage of by someone. They send off a transaction, and the bank has no way to stop that legally if they suspect there's some fraud. So this piece of legislation gives the banks the ability to, at their discretion, if they think there's some fraudulent activity going on, to be able to stop that transaction in order to benefit the customer. Now, some people may have some free market objections to this bill, but the way I look at it is an elderly person puts the money in the bank, and if they don't feel the bank's doing a very good service to them, they have the ability to withdraw their money and put it into another bank. But overall, this is a tool that banks can use to stop what they believe to be fraudulent activity and put a stop to those types of crimes. Another good piece of legislation was Senate Bill 93 by Senator Anna Vitarte. Was TikTok, eliminating TikTok from state-owned devices. Now, TikTok is used by the Department of Public Safety. It's used by the University System of Georgia to try to recruit and be a good marketing tool. But unfortunately, TikTok is controlled by the Chinese Communist Party, and ultimately they can use that app to become a Trojan. To listen to conversations, to look at information on the phone. Very scary stuff if you have TikTok on your phone now. And very wise that we eliminate that from all state devices. Another great bill, Senate Bill 65, was going to create a health insurance exchange that will be regulated by our insurance commission. So Obamacare, if the healthcare exchange isn't working to Georgians' benefit, Georgia has the ability to create its own exchange now. Great piece of legislation. Another piece of good, Senate Bill 59, which is going to give law enforcement authority to the Inspector General in the governor's office. Now, who is the Inspector General? The Inspector General is someone who goes out into the executive branch, right? The executive branch is very big in government, right? It's everything from state parks to the Department of Transportation. I mean, it's very big and broad. It gives the Inspector General the ability to look for corruption, look for fraud, and have law enforcement authority when that is found. Now, one of the objections, one of the things that I wanted to take note of, come in. Yeah, working a little bit late here, getting the office cleaned out. Thank you, sir. Many thanks. So what happens with the Inspector General if there's a governor like Stacey Abrams that's elected and then their Inspector General doesn't transfer or does transfer into the next governor? Well, that was addressed in the piece of legislation to where a governor, the Inspector General will roll into the next governorship, but that governor has the ability to, under good cause, make that Inspector General resign. So it ended up becoming a very good piece of legislation that I think will help stop future corruption in our state. Another good piece of legislation, Senate Bill 68, as it relates to dog fighting and putting it into the code of racketeering. If you're wagering and doing dog fighting, you're probably doing some racketeering. Another bill, Senate Bill 73, as it relates to telemarketers, right? We always get those phone calls about your car's extended warranty and other things of the such. The problem that we have in going after these types of people is a lot of times foreign companies are the ones who's actually making the phone call, and domestic companies are the ones who are contracting them. So this piece of legislation gives citizens the right now to sue those domestic companies that are hiring those foreign entities to make those nasty calls. Another good piece, Senate Bill 69, giving appropriations for Clarence Thomas, Justice Clarence Thomas, the United States Supreme Court, a statue here at the Georgia Capitol. One of the greatest Georgians of all time, in my opinion, right? He was raised by his grandparents and grow up doing HVAC work with his grandfather, becomes a Supreme Court justice, one of the most conservative and the best justices America's probably ever seen. And, poor Clarence Thomas, he's always taken hits throughout his time in politics. We even had Georgia senators calling him an Uncle Tom. Absolutely unreal on the Senate chamber floor. But, we've talked about a lot of good, but we're talking about some bad bills, some bills that I just don't think accomplished what they were intended to do. Senate Bill 44, which was going to make people felons if you encourage someone to join a gang. Now, at the surface, that sounds like a good piece of legislation. But I'm going to show a video here in a second of a sheriff down in Florida who paints a really good picture of what the current situation is for a lot of sex workers in the world who are basically becoming indentured servants. And many times, they may recruit somebody just to help them in their cause. And ultimately, for me, I never wanted to make them a convicted felon. I ended up voting no on the entire piece of legislation. As it relates to human trafficking, there was another bill this past week, Senate Bill 42. I was the only senator to vote against this piece of legislation. Now, this piece of legislation was known as the First Lady's piece of legislation. Obviously, with the Grace Commission, they have a strong focus in stopping human trafficking. I, too, have a strong focus in stopping human trafficking. I had the interstate cooperation hearing this past Friday, and we talked a lot about human trafficking. But this piece of legislation was designed to help stop that. But in many ways, it's not going to do, I think, as good of a job stopping that as it is going to become a burdensome regulation for many of our Northwest Georgia ag producers. It was so ironic that the day that piece of legislation came up was also Farm Bureau Day. And I talked with many ag producers from around Northwest Georgia, and I didn't tell them that it was the First Lady's bill. And I said, just read this as it relates to ag producers and tell me how you would vote. And every one of them said, yeah, I would probably vote no on that. So why would they vote no? So the way the current letter of the law reads is if you're an ag producer and you hire employees, or if you're on a strip club, you're supposed to put a sign up. It's an 8.5 by 11 sign that says, ask a question. Do you think you are a sex worker or you enforce labor? And if so, will you call this hotline number? Now, there's not any teeth to that. There was no enforcement mechanism. So the enforcement mechanism was this bill, Senate Bill 42. And that was going to give law enforcement the ability to fine someone who doesn't have that sign up $1,000 up to $5,000 for having that sign up. Now, I know plenty of ag producers in Northwest Georgia that hire people always above board, and to give government the ability to walk into their vet shack or into their hay barn and say, you don't have this sign up, but you've got employees out there, we're going to fine you $1,000. To me, that's government overreach. And to me, if we want to solve the human trafficking problem, we need to be funding law enforcement to enforce the laws that we already have. Creating this type of legislation, which I would consider feel-good legislation, I don't think gets the job done. I mean, if you think about our total law enforcement numbers, 5 or 6 years ago, I think we had like 67,000 law enforcement officers across the state. That's sheriff's deputies, state troopers, all across the board. Today, we're only in the mid-40s, like 5,000 or something like that. And the population of Georgia has increased by 1 million, or if not 2 million. So how do we've had a reduction in law enforcement officers, an increase in people. We've got to get back to funding law enforcement to enforce the laws that we already have. We're never going to be able to legislate our way out of this type of scenario that we found ourselves in. So anyway, that's kind of a synopsis of good legislation and bad legislation that's happened over the last week and a half or so. I will continue to keep you posted on what's coming across the Senate floor. And take a look at this video of the sheriff in Florida.
The run-up to Super Bowl. We are doing a human trafficking operation, as we do several times a year, where we're looking for the victims of human trafficking, those that are forced to participate, those that are made to participate, those that are treated inhumanely. We had 213 arrests, as I said previously. In addition to the human trafficking arrest, the prostitution arrest, we had drugs, we had guns, we had prostitution, we had johns. Across the spectrum of criminal charges, we had those. 111 were prostitutes, 89 were johns. There were 24 victims that I want to show you here that we suspect are victims of human trafficking. That's why they're blanked out. Now, we suspect this, and all of these are being counseled with at this time. What I'm excited to announce to you today, this is the most we've identified at the initial stage of the investigation or operation. As you know, the human trafficking victim is a very difficult victim to work with because they're scared. They're certainly more scared of their pimp, of their trafficker, than they are of law enforcement. But this time, these ladies and their team of counselors did and continue to do remarkable work. They'll talk more about that later. But if you look, we've got a color code here. Because of our human trafficking victims, 14 of these females are illegally in this country. Did you hear that? Did you hear clearly what I said? 14 of them are here illegally in the country. To me, the bombshell is 13 of them are Cuban, one is Mexican. All of them came to us through the southern border. So I want you to focus for just a second as I speak, that we hear the political 30-second bites about, oh, the border's porous. No, it's not. The border is secure. No, it's not. There's really not a crisis at the border. Yes, there's a crisis at the border. Wake up. Somebody in Washington with more than 5 brain cells needs to listen to this. We're maybe asking them to have 5 brain cells too many. Let's shoot for 3 brain cells. But the reality is, this is what we found. These ladies all arrived within the last 2 years. The majority of them arrived within the last 6 months. Some of them arrived in the last 2 weeks. And just how did they get here and what was told to us? That they were paying off their transportation debt, that they were being smuggled into the United States to have sex, that their family at home was being threatened if they didn't come here and do what they were supposed to and pay off the debts. Did you hear that? So it's not enough that we've got illegal entries. Forget the illegal entries for a moment that are coming here to work, to do good, to do better for their family. What everyone's ignoring is the traffickers in fentanyl that are killing thousands upon thousands upon thousands of our people every day. The traffickers of methamphetamine that are all coming across that border with the traffickers of fentanyl. That these human traffickers are forcing ladies across this border to commit sex so they can indenture them. And yet, we don't do what we need to do. I suggest to you that what we are doing with the immigration issue today is simply this. It's like you go home this evening and, oh my gosh, a pipe is broken and I've got water all over the floor. Well, the federal government's got water all over the floor and they're in there trying to mop it up. At least they say they are. But at the same time, the pipe's still pumping more water onto the floor. The first thing you do when you go home this evening and you find a pipe is broken and you've got water on the floor is you go find the source and turn the valve off. And then you mop up and you fix the problem. But we don't. So these ladies are being forced across the border. They're being threatened to kill their families back at home. At the end of the day, some of them say, well, it's also a quick avenue for cash. I'm here illegally. I can't speak English. What these ladies have discovered, and they're going to give you the details, is most of the time when we arrest what I call a professional prostitute, she's angry, she's mad, she lashes out. What we saw with these human trafficking victims is they're scared, they're dejected, they're depressed. The Cubans said they came here through Nicaragua. They had to make their way through Honduras, Guatemala, all the way through Mexico to the United States border. So how do you traverse all of that area? Coyotes, smugglers. They identify them and say, here, you're coming, we'll get you there, and you're paying. And these ladies were paying a ridiculous, horrible price. So at the end of the day, we arrested also 4 previous prostitutes that we'd arrested before in previous operations, and 1 John. One arrest was not enough for him here or for the 4 ladies, and we arrested them again. So some of these pictures are up here for a second time. 2 of our Johns showed up with concealed firearms. 22 of these folks were on public assistance. You know what I think about that. We all work. We pay our taxes. We expect public assistance to go to those who are very old, very young, that are significantly in need and can't care for themselves. But they're healthy enough while you're paying taxes and they're getting your tax money that they can come here and prostitute or seek out prostitutes. That's right, 22 of them were on public assistance. 54 were arrested with some form of drug charges. We filed over 100 drug charges.
Now, you see a video like that, and it's extremely depressing. It's disheartening. But what a time to be alive. I mean, that was a Florida sheriff, but that type of thing is going on in Georgia, too. And politicians, we shouldn't be making feel-good legislation or making talking points about human trafficking. We need to get down to really solving the problem. And feel free to reach out to me anytime with any of your questions, any of your concerns, just like those ag producers in Northwest Georgia did when it related to the human trafficking piece of legislation. I'm always eager to hear from you. We'll see you next week. Thanks for tuning in. We got a country to save and a state to save as well. Thanks a lot.